Al Jazeera Podcasts.
We have breaking news now out of the United States. US President Joe Biden has ended his re-election campaign.
When US President Joe Biden dropped out of the re-election race in July, he quickly endorsed his VP Kamala Harris for the Democratic nomination.
Please welcome the Democratic nominee for president, Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris.
Many Democrats threw their support behind her immediately, while other prominent Democrats, like former President Barack Obama and former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, took longer to endorse her.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you.
But one group wasted no time. Win with Black Women got more than 40,000 people on a Zoom call and raised more than $1 million for Harris's campaign. Now, the Black vote is important to Harris, but will they come through for her? I'm Samantha Johnson, and this is Now You Know, a new series from Al Jazeera dedicated to amplifying women's voices, stories, and topics we're all thinking and talking about. This is a safe space where we go all in, so by the end of each episode, you can say, "Now I know." Early voting is already underway in some states. Now, whatever your political stripes, we all pretty much want the same thing: a roof over our head we can afford, adequate healthcare, and the right to make decisions about our lives without judgment. Figures show there are around 34 million Black eligible voters in the US. One woman who's fighting for Black voices to be heard is LaTosha Brown. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, a group dedicated to getting Black voters to engage in elections. Now, she's not just here to tell me about why Black votes matter in the US, but she's here to tell us what Black women want. So, LaTosha, thank you very much for joining us on Now You Know.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to talk about what Black women want in these elections. But before we do, I want you to take us to the beginning and why you started Black Voters Matter.
You know, for a number of years, since I was in my early 20s, I've been doing political work. My business partner and I, we had created a business together, and we would always kind of support the work that we were doing through our business. What we wanted to do is to create an organization for people like us who for years were on the front lines doing the work, but oftentimes did not have the kind of resources and support we needed. And so in 2017, it was really interesting. I think, you know, we heard the call from the Black Lives Matter movement. We just were feeling like we were not doing enough, that we needed to do more work. We wanted to do two things. We wanted to make sure that we were doing more institution building in our community. And two, we wanted to get people more engaged around this idea of we needed more power, political power, social power, economic power. And so we created Black Voters Matter in 2016, in kind of response to this need to do more into institution building. So we wanted to create an organization that would combat that, and literally we would have a message that was rooted in the promise of hope, power, healing, and love.
So you've been very hands-on when it comes to the Black community. I'm intrigued to know, since you started Black Voters Matter, what have you noticed when it comes to the elections? Are a lot of people getting out there? Are they excited about going to the polls?
You know, I think it depends on what activity happens before the elections. Now, part of what I think happens with the electoral cycles is that people over the years have been feeling exploited, that they feel that, like, on one hand, you know, you only come around when there's an election cycle. And so here somebody else is asking us something to do, but we're not necessarily seeing the kind of change that we want to see. And then it becomes this kind of exchange of what can you do for me, or what I'm going to promise to do for you, and I've not seen you throughout the year. But what we've noticed is that when there is an ongoing engagement in communities, that what you see is you actually see that engagement continue to build.
So the elections are just around the corner, and I'd really like to know how influential the Black votes could be this year.
I think this is one of the most significant elections for Black voters. This is a tight election. And so this is an election that literally is down to the wire of who's going to come out. And then when you look at the battleground states like Georgia, when you look at North Carolina, when you look at Michigan, when you look at Pennsylvania, when you look at Arizona, there are communities of color that actually are going to make the difference in those elections. When you have an election that has a tight margin, that when you have groups like when you have like Black voters in those particularly that make a significant part of the population, that makes a major difference. So I do believe that this is one of the election cycles that Black voters will actually help make a difference around and shaping on the outcome. Now, I don't think that is totally the responsibility of Black voters to win or lose this election, but I certainly believe that we will be extremely impactful. I think Black women in particular will have a lot of stake at this particular election. You know, when we're looking at the attack on reproductive rights and reproductive justice and what that's meant, even for when we're looking at there were 2 Black women that have died for what could have been a simple procedure.
ProPublica published a new report on a second woman in Georgia who died from medical abortion complications. Candy Miller's family said she didn't visit a doctor, quote, due to the current legislation on pregnancies and abortions.
It was completely preventable, but because of the abortion law, now you've got 2 Black women who unnecessarily died. Their families are grieving. They've left loved ones, children, partners. And so I think this is really critical in a state that when you look at maternal mortality, that maternal mortality continues to be one of the highest in the state. So a state that does not take care of women who are pregnant now are creating laws that literally put our very lives at risk. And so I think that Black women, our voices will be key and critical in this election cycle because of a number of reasons.
And when it comes to Kamala Harris, there's a reality that she could be the first woman of color, first Black woman, first South Asian woman as the president of the United States. How do Black women feel about that prospect?
Oh, listen. Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. You know, that song captures how we feel, that ultimately, that while this moment and this opportunity, this woman at the top of the ticket can become the president, the highest office in the land. What we know is all of the women that have sacrificed so much to get here. When we think about the Shirley Chisholms and we think about the Ida B. Wells, and I can go on and on, the Sojourner Truths and Harriet Tubmans and the Amelia Boyingtons, and I can go on and on and on. Black women have always stood in this country on the front lines of democracy and opened up paths and new ways for service and for leadership. And yes, we have actually pushed and wanted and desired and worked because we did want a Black woman to lead this country. Why? Because we believe that our leadership, we have a clear, concise understanding of sitting at the intersection of sexism and racism, that we know what it feels like to be excluded. We know what it feels like to not be included. We know what it feels like to nurture and have to care for our families and our communities. And so we want someone in office that actually shares that sentiment, that someone who understands the complexity of this nation and the complexities of what it means that when people are left out and pushed on the margins and don't have what they need. And so for Black women, as a Black woman, speaking for myself and other Black women that I'm in relationship with, we are so excited about just this moment. It's going to open up the opportunities in every sector of our society, in the business sector, in the education sector, the excitement of that our work has gotten us to this point, that our work and our belief in our power has gotten us to this point.
And speaking about the work that you've done throughout the years, as a Black woman, how have you found it in that political sphere?
I really believe that we can create the world that we desire and we deserve. I literally believe that we have the capacity as human beings to be able to resolve conflict without war. I really believe that there's enough resources that not a single woman, man, or child should go to sleep at night hungry because they don't have the resources to pay their families. I fundamentally believe that we've got the capacity. It's a question of whether we have the will, but to be able to create an education system that every single child gets a fair shot and gets quality education regardless of their zip code. That's my belief, and that's what drives me. So as a Black woman, why am I doing this work? I'm doing this work not because I believe in a political system. I'm doing this work because I believe in our power to change, to transform, to really create the kind of America that has yet to be born. We've not seen the America that is all men and women are created equal and endowed by their creator. I want that to manifest to be what is real. I want to see where people have access to freedoms, the freedoms to actually do the things that they desire to do that's in health and in service of all of humanity. I believe that. And that's part of the reason why I do the work. And I believe that the way that that happens, I think people have to make it happen. I don't think that is just going to happen on its own. I believe that a healthy democracy means that you've got a healthy electorate that is engaged in this process.
And for our listeners and our viewers on Now You Know, they might not be aware of the history between Black voters and the Democratic Party. Can you just go into the history of that? Because when it comes to, the percentage of Black voters going for Democrats, it normally comes in high numbers. So why is that?
There's been a long, interesting history with, I think, both political parties that fundamentally, let's be clear, neither party wanted us to participate in this process, particularly early on. That's why it has been a long road to secure voting rights. I am a native of Selma, Alabama. In Selma, Alabama, in the 60s, there was a movement, a voting rights movement, to make sure that Black people had free and fair access to the ballot and the right to vote. And so while we had to push Republicans, I had to push Democrats, quite frankly. What we've seen over the years, we've seen more participation, more opening in the Democratic Party, so that when you look at Democratic Party leadership, the current chair of the Democratic Party is an African-American. And so ultimately what you've seen, though, in recent years, when we're talking about policy priorities, the Democratic Party has been the party, the go-to party, because it aligns with what we believe are policies that are good for our communities.
But you could argue that today's politics, everything is quite polarized. So there's no one really meeting in the middle. So it's kind of,
I actually disagree.
You're either far left or far right.
I actually disagree. I don't think that the Democratic Party has polarized itself. I think that's like telling, like for me as a Black person, I'm not thinking anymore. I've never been polarized. I've always thought and believed that.
No, I just mean the party system. I mean, it's kind of hard. Let's just say you, when it comes to the economy, you're more than likely to go for Republican. But when it comes to social issues, then you'll go to the Democrats, but there's nothing in the middle. It's either one or the other. So it's kind of difficult for people to choose, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think on some level it's how, I think what I'm seeing is how do we see polarized? Because at the end of the day, what the middle in America has meant is white interests. Anything outside of white interests has meant that it is on that you're on the left or you're liberal. The truth of the matter is most Black folks I know in the Deep South are not necessarily identify themselves with being liberal. They're just trying to live like everybody else. But it has been literally our politics, and that's part of why I push back on that. It has been my very presence, right? For me to want the same thing that the white woman Republican wants, for me to want it means that I'm liberal? No, it means that I'm human.
Okay, so let's talk about the generational factor and the fact that you do have a lot of young Black voters who are twice or probably three times removed from the civil rights era. So maybe they don't connect so much with that era and generation. So they're more concerned about what they're worried about in today's society. How big of a factor is that going to be when it comes to voting?
I think it actually started in some ways my own generation, which was Generation X, that we were children that were born after the civil rights movement, right? And many of us, even our families, the goal was to go to school, grow, get you a good job and get paid. I always say, I call them the Janet Jackson generation. They are the what have you done for me lately? And to be honest, I actually think it's a good thing. I don't think that it's a bad thing. I think that it will help push for the evolution of both political parties and this political process, that they're coming to this process clear-eyed, not necessarily seeing or attaching themselves to loyalty to one party, one particular party, but literally they're looking at what are you going to do for me? What about your policies or your leadership is going to help increase the quality of my life or provide or open up, expand opportunities for me? And I believe what we're seeing is this shift. We're actually in this lifetime of in this space seeing this shift of people move away from this idea of party loyalty and literally move to what are going to be practical policies or positions that are going to actually just make my life better. That ultimately I want to get paid for when I work. I want to be able to buy a home. I want to be able to raise my children, those things. And so it's really interesting because I do believe that paradigm has shifted. Those voters normally want to, there are a couple of differences that I noticed. That one, they want to be listened to. Secondly, I think that they have created this way that you got to earn their vote. And I believe that's a good thing, that you can no longer just depend on, we're going to vote a particular kind of way because our predecessors or historically, but they're saying that you have to earn my vote.
LaTosha Brown, thank you so much for talking to us on Now You Know. I really appreciate you giving your expertise and your time to our podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's look at the numbers. What are the hard facts behind what Black women and men want ahead of the US election? Now, for that, we have Kiana Cox. Kiana is a senior researcher at Pew Research Center and is a specialist on race and ethnicity. So, Kiana, you are very much needed in this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on Now You Know.
No problem.
Okay, so let's get straight to it. Your work mainly focuses on race and ethnicity, but seeing as this is the election year in the US, you're looking at voting trends across the board. I mean, let's break it down a little bit and let's look at the numbers, especially when it comes to the Black vote. How important is the Black vote going to be this year?
When it comes to Black voters, one of the things that our data demonstrates is that they have consistently affiliated with or lean towards the Democratic Party. So, for example, we looked at party affiliation trends over the last 30 years. And and Black voters, by and large, have been about 80% or more Democrats since 1994. They've been very consistent with that. Over the summer, as we looked at first when Biden was at the top of the ticket, and then as Harris came to the top of the ticket, Black voters consistently were among the highest in terms of the racial and ethnic groups to support Biden in the beginning, even though they wanted changes in the election field. They still were more likely than voters of other races to support Biden. So Black voters have consistently identified with the Democratic Party.
So I believe in the last election, it was like 92% of Black voters went for the Democrats and Joe Biden. But as you just said there, Kamala Harris is getting, sorry, what was the number again?
Right now, Kamala Harris is 79% of Black voters say they will vote for her.
79%. Why is that on the decrease? Who are the other voters going for?
One thing we have to be careful about when we're comparing previous election cycles to what we're seeing right now is that the numbers that we're talking about right now are pre-election numbers. We're asking voters to project forward to what they would do or to predict their own behavior. We want to be careful not to make a one-to-one comparison to what people actually did versus all of these polls right now, which is just asking people to project forward about what they would do. So I'm hesitant to even characterize that as a decrease because it's not the same measure. It's not the same statistic.
It's not the same measure or the same statistic, and I totally understand where you're coming from, but that's still quite the drop. So what is it that's not, what's the disconnect between voting for or standing behind Biden and now going for Harris? Like, why isn't she trending as much as Biden?
When there was the switch at the top of the ticket from Biden to Harris, our analysis shows that Harris retained about 96% of Biden's Black supporters while picking up about half of Kennedy's. Throughout this entire process, Black support for Donald Trump has remained about the same, so hovering a little less than 15% overall. And so in terms of retention of voters from in this pre-election period from one candidate to the other, Harris, based on our numbers, has retained those voters. But again, it's difficult, at least for me, to compare outcome data with people projecting forward, especially in a really close election with a lot of upheaval that's hard to measure in terms of the assassination attempts, the change at the top of the Democratic ticket. There are lots of factors that are very unpredictable that play into how people are thinking about what they will do.
One of the big talking points surrounding these elections is the generational divide when it comes to the Black community. How much of a factor is that when it comes to the polls, when it comes to voting?
We see some differences between younger Black adults and older Black adults across all of our work. So, even beyond our election work, in our national survey of Black Americans over the last 3 or 4 years, what we've seen is that younger Black adults are less likely to be engaged with various aspects of Black politics, Black culture, or even Black identity. We've seen significant differences between the extent to which younger Black adults, particularly those under 30, say that being Black is an essential part of how they think
Mm.
about themselves. It's about 15 percentage points less than what older Black adults say. And we're also seeing it in these voter numbers too, where younger Black voters, though still a majority, are less likely than older Black voters to support Harris. And that is that's an interesting point to note in the US, because that pattern reverses in the general public. In the US overall, older voters are more likely to support Trump or the top of the Republican ticket. But for Black voters, older voters are more likely to support Harris or the top of the Democratic ticket.
And speaking of the Republican Party as well, I kind of went down a bit of a rabbit hole on YouTube for in preparation for this conversation. And one of the another huge topic is Black Republicans. And in fact, the GOP said that more Black voters are voting for them for the first time. So can you just tell me what are the actual numbers of those Black voters who have defected from being a Democrat to Republican?
Sure. Our data doesn't really show an exodus of or an influx of Black voters into the Republican Party. There are some differences in that. Younger Black voters have been more likely than older Black voters to affiliate with the Republican Party since 1994, whereas about 5% of Black voters over 50 lean towards the Republican Party. About 15% of those under 50 do. So we do see some age there in terms of Republican identification, but overall it's held pretty steady at about 10%.
So it held steady at 10%, but don't know, is it increasing a little bit, or are people saying, I'm going to vote Democrat, but as soon as they get into the voters' booth, they want to vote for Trump because they probably identify with his politics, his policies, they care about the economy? I mean, will we see a shift there?
We're seeing a couple of things related to that. So throughout throughout the summer, throughout this election cycle, the share of Black voters who say that they will vote for Trump has remained steady. It's been about 13 to 15%, even through the change from Biden to Harris, all the way, even Trump's favorability in terms of how positively do Black voters view Trump. That's also been consistent over the past year and a half, with favorability of Donald Trump being at about the same level, about 13 to 15%. So based on our national trends, it's been very steady. Where we do see some differences related to what you mentioned about the economy, and also a lot of conversation has been about gender. One of the things where we do see a difference is in um, confidence in the candidates on their ability to make certain policy decisions. Now, there are two important points about that. The first one is that overall, Black voters are more confident in Harris than Trump on all of the issues that we asked about, whether that's the economy, racial and ethnic equality, whether that's gun policy, abortion policy, Supreme Court appointments, healthcare. We asked about 10 different issues, and Black voters are more confident in Harris than Trump overall. Almost about between 70 to 80% of Black voters are confident that Kamala Harris can make good decisions on all of those policy areas. And no more than about 30% of Black voters are confident that Donald Trump can make good decisions in those policy areas. So the second point, though, is that when we kind of break that apart by candidate, if we compare subgroup to subgroup, that Black men are more likely than Black women to say that they are confident in Trump on the economy. About 40% of Black men think that Donald Trump can make good decisions about the economy, compared to about 25% of Black women. For younger voters, the number is a little bit higher, where about almost 45% of younger Black voters say that they think that Donald Trump can make good decisions about the economy. And it's a little bit lower. It's about 20% of Black voters over 50 who say the same thing. So while we're not seeing overall an influx of Black voters in terms of identifying with the Republican Party, we are seeing some of these nuanced differences when we start asking about confidence in candidates.
You made a very interesting point there about what Black men would find confident in Donald Trump. What about Black women? What do Black women find important in these elections?
By far, they are more confident in Kamala Harris on the economy. And that's the one issue where we were seeing these differences. And that's why I'm pointing to that one. That's one of the places where we see a gender difference, is on this question of the economy, with Black women being more likely than Black men to say that they are confident in Kamala Harris on the economy. So about 85% of Black women say they are confident that Kamala Harris can make good decisions about the economy, and about 70% of Black men say the same. So that's where we see a gender difference in terms of the issues that people are confident in the candidates on, but there's not any gender differences in terms of the top issues that people are interested in.
Can you talk about the conversation surrounding the future of US politics at all? There just seems to be a lot of frustration that neither really believe in Donald Trump or believe in Kamala Harris. They're just frustrated with these two parties and they're looking for something else. So I don't know, can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, there's some evidence, particularly among Black voters, about dissatisfaction with the candidate field. So earlier in the summer, when Biden was in the race, certainly the national trend there was that voters wanted to replace both candidates at the top of the ticket, and dissatisfaction with the candidate field was pretty high once Kamala Harris came to the top of the ticket. So there was a shift there in terms of viewing how positively people viewed the campaign. The other thing that we saw, though, back to the point that you raised earlier about age, is that younger Black voters, even though they are more positive about Kamala Harris now, even though the majority of them will vote for her, though to a lower level than older voters, the majority of them, almost 60%, are still dissatisfied with the candidate field. So there is still some dissatisfaction among Black voters in terms of how they're viewing the election, particularly among younger Black voters that we're seeing.
Kiana Cox, you are the real deal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for talking to us on Now You Know.
Thank you.
So now you know where the American Black vote stands and what kind of impact it could make come November the 5th. Thank you to LaTosha Brown and Kiana Cox for talking to me today. And of course, a special thanks to you for watching and listening to Now You Know.